I thought I knew everything about her, until the day I discovered the one thing she had hidden for years, and suddenly every memory I shared with her felt completely different. My name is Hannah Parker, and for most of my life, I believed I was someone who could understand people easily. As a freelance photographer in Portland, Oregon, I had spent years capturing stories through my camera. I noticed small details, quiet expressions, and moments most people overlooked. I built my career around seeing things others missed. But when it came to Claire Reynolds, the person who had been closest to me for years, I realized I had missed the most important story of all. Claire was the kind of person everyone trusted. She was a talented architect with a calm presence that made people feel comfortable around her. She never needed to be the center of attention, yet somehow people always noticed when she entered a room. She had a way of listening that made others feel understood. I met Claire 8 years earlier at a local art event in Portland. I was taking photographs for a small magazine feature, and she was there presenting one of her architectural projects. We started talking about creativity, places we wanted to visit, and the dreams we were still chasing. What started as a simple conversation slowly became a friendship I never expected. Over the years, Claire became the person I called when something exciting happened. She was the first person I wanted to tell when I received a new photography opportunity. She was also the person who reminded me to slow down when I became too focused on work. Looking back, I realize Claire was always present in the quiet moments that mattered most. She remembered my favorite coffee order, noticed when I was stressed even before I admitted it, and encouraged me whenever I doubted myself. At the time, I thought those things were simply signs of a strong friendship. I never questioned them. I never looked deeper. Maybe that was because I was comfortable with the way things were. Maybe I was afraid that asking too many questions could change something valuable. Claire and I had built a connection that felt safe. It was familiar, steady, and easy to trust. But life has a way of revealing truths when we least expect them. The discovery I made did not happen during some dramatic moment. It was a simple moment, in an ordinary day, that changed the way I looked at someone I thought I already knew. Suddenly, small memories from the past started connecting in ways I had never considered. Conversations, gestures, and moments that once seemed ordinary began to carry a different meaning. I found myself wondering how much of Claire's story I had never truly understood. More importantly, I started wondering how much of my own feelings I had ignored. At that moment, I did not have all the answers. I only knew one thing. The person I thought I knew completely still had a chapter of her life I had never read, and discovering that chapter would change everything between us. After that day, I could not stop thinking about how many times I had looked at Claire without truly seeing her. It felt strange to realize that someone who had been part of my everyday life for years could still hold parts of herself that I had never discovered. I kept going back to the same memories, wondering if there were signs I had ignored or moments I had misunderstood. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that Claire had never hidden who she was. She had simply waited until she felt ready to share her story. Claire had always been a private person. Not distant, not cold, but someone who carefully chose what pieces of herself she allowed others to see. I had always admired that about her. While I was constantly searching for new experiences and capturing other people's stories through my photography, Claire seemed comfortable carrying her own world quietly inside. Her life looked simple from the outside. She spent her days working on architectural designs, visiting project locations, and creating spaces that reflected the personalities of the people who would live in them. But there was always something thoughtful behind the way she approached everything. Claire did not just design buildings. She cared about the emotions connected to those places. That was one of the reasons I respected her so much. She understood that every person had a story. I just never realized that Claire had been protecting a story of her own. A few days after my discovery, I met Claire at our favorite coffee shop in downtown Portland. It was a place we had visited countless times over the years. The same small table near the window, the same quiet atmosphere, and the same comfortable feeling that made it seem like the world outside could wait for a while. Claire smiled when she saw me, completely unaware of how much had changed inside my thoughts. We talked about normal things at first. Work, upcoming projects, places we wanted to visit. Everything seemed familiar, but I felt different. I found myself paying attention in a new way. I noticed the way she paused before answering certain questions. I noticed the emotions behind her expressions. I realized that I had spent years photographing strangers and searching for hidden stories, yet I had never taken the time to truly understand the person sitting across from me. Claire eventually asked if something was on my mind. She knew me well enough to recognize when I was lost in thought. For a moment, I almost avoided the conversation. It was easier to pretend nothing had changed. It was easier to stay inside the comfort of what I already knew. But curiosity and honesty were pulling me in another direction. I wanted to understand Claire, not because I wanted to uncover some secret, but because I cared about the person she was. That realization surprised me. My interest was no longer just about discovering a hidden part of her life. It was about wanting to know her more deeply. As we sat there together, I started to understand something important. Sometimes the people closest to us are not mysteries because they are hiding from us. They are mysteries because every person has layers that take time, trust, and patience to reveal. And with Claire, I was beginning to see that our story had always been more complicated and more meaningful than I had ever imagined. The more time I spent thinking about Claire, the more I realized that my understanding of her had always been limited by my own assumptions. I had known her for 8 years, shared countless conversations with her, and trusted her more than almost anyone in my life. Yet somehow, I had only seen the parts of her that she felt comfortable showing. I started wondering what other stories were hidden behind the calm smile I had always recognized. Claire and I continued our usual routines after that coffee shop conversation. We met after work, exchanged messages during busy days, and talked about everything from creative projects to future plans. From the outside, nothing had changed. But inside my own mind, everything felt different. I was no longer simply noticing Claire's actions. I was beginning to understand the meaning behind them. I remembered the small moments I had forgotten. The time I was preparing for an important photography project and doubted my abilities, Claire stayed late at a cafe with me, helping me organize my ideas until I felt confident again. The time I moved into a new apartment, she spent an entire weekend helping me make the space feel like home. The time I felt lost about my career, she reminded me that my ability to capture emotions through images was something special. Back then, I thought Claire was simply an incredible friend. And she was. But now I was beginning to understand that there was something deeper in the way she had always been there for me. One evening, I visited Claire's architecture studio after she finished work. The space reflected everything about her personality. It was organized but creative, professional but warm. There were sketches on the walls, models on the tables, and notes scattered around that showed how much thought she put into every project. Watching her work gave me a new perspective. Claire had a unique way of creating spaces where people felt comfortable being themselves. Maybe that was why so many people trusted her. She had always understood that everyone carried a story that was not immediately visible. As we walked through the studio, Claire shared memories from her early career. She talked about the challenges she faced and the moments when she questioned whether she had chosen the right path. I listened carefully because I realized I had rarely asked her about these things. I was always grateful for her support, but I had not always given her the same space to share her own experiences. That thought stayed with me. A friendship should never be one person always giving and the other always receiving. True connection came from understanding both sides. Later that night, as I walked home through the streets of Portland, I thought about how much a person could reveal without saying anything at all. Claire had never been a mystery because she was trying to hide. She was a mystery because I had never taken enough time to look beyond the surface. I began to understand that the discovery I had made was not about finding something unexpected about Claire. It was about realizing there were still parts of her waiting to be understood. And perhaps, those hidden parts were the ones that would finally show me who she truly was. I thought I was looking for an answer, but I slowly realized I was searching for something much deeper. I was trying to understand a person who had always been part of my life, yet somehow still felt like a story I had only read halfway. Claire had never given me a reason to doubt her. She had always been honest, supportive, and genuine. The uncertainty came from me. I was the one who had never stopped to ask the questions that mattered most. A few days after visiting Claire's studio, I found myself thinking about one particular memory that had stayed with me for years. It was a rainy evening in Portland when I had received disappointing news about a photography opportunity one wanted. I remember feeling like all the effort I had put into my work was not enough. Claire had invited me to sit with her at a small cafe near my apartment. She did not try to fix everything or give me simple advice. She just listened. At the time, I thought that was what made her a great friend. Now, I wondered if there was something more behind the way she always seemed to understand me. That question stayed in my mind because it changed the way I viewed our entire friendship. I started paying attention to moments I had previously overlooked. The way Claire always remembered the details of my stories. The way she noticed when I was overwhelmed before I said anything. The way she encouraged me to believe in myself when I was ready to give up. None of those things were dramatic. They were small, everyday moments. But sometimes the smallest moments reveal the biggest truths. One weekend, Claire invited me to help her organize old design sketches at her studio. As we sorted through years of her work, I saw a different side of her. There were drawings from projects she had completed, ideas she had abandoned, and notes about dreams she once had but never pursued. It felt like looking through a collection of memories rather than simple pieces of paper. Claire was always creating spaces for other people, but I began wondering how often she allowed herself to create a space where she could be completely open. While we worked, she told me stories about her younger years. She talked about how difficult it had been to understand what she wanted from life and how long it took her to accept certain parts of herself. I listened quietly because I realized this was a side of Claire I had rarely seen. She was not just the confident architect who seemed to have everything together. She was also someone who had spent years learning, changing, and finding her own path. That conversation stayed with me long after I left her studio. I realized that every person carries invisible chapters of their life. Some chapters are shared easily, while others require trust and time. Claire had spent years being there for me, but now I wanted to be someone who could truly be there for her. The more I understood her, the more I questioned my own feelings. I was no longer simply curious about the hidden parts of her story. I cared about them because I cared about her. And that realization was something I could no longer ignore. I started to realize that the hardest truths to accept are not always the ones that surprise us. Sometimes they are the ones that quietly appear after years of ignoring what has been right in front of us. With Claire, I was beginning to understand that the connection between us had always been deeper than I allowed myself to recognize. The question was no longer about what she had kept hidden. The question was about what I had been unwilling to see. For the first time in years, I started looking back at our friendship from a different perspective. I remembered the way Claire always made time for me, even during the busiest periods of her career. She was building her reputation as an architect, managing demanding projects, and constantly creating new ideas, yet she always found moments to check on me. I used to think it was simply because she was naturally thoughtful. That was true, but now I wondered if there was another reason behind the care she showed. The realization made me feel both comforted and uncertain. I was grateful for everything Claire had brought into my life, but I also felt nervous about changing the way I saw her. Some relationships feel special because they are familiar. They become part of our daily lives so naturally that we stop questioning their importance. Claire had become that person for me. She was the person I trusted without thinking. The person I wanted to share good news with. The person whose opinion mattered more than I wanted to admit. One evening, I invited Claire to join me for a walk through a neighborhood in Portland where I often photographed old buildings and quiet streets. The weather was calm, and the city felt peaceful. As we walked, we talked about our plans for the future. Claire shared her hopes of creating more meaningful architecture projects, spaces that would tell stories and bring people together. Listening to her, I was reminded of something I had always admired about her. Claire never focused only on appearances. She cared about the emotions connected to every place and every person. That was who she was. She looked beneath the surface. Maybe that was why I felt so comfortable around her. She had always seen parts of me that I rarely showed other people. During our conversation, Claire asked me if I had ever felt like I was waiting for my life to begin. The question caught me off guard because it felt strangely personal. I admitted that sometimes I focused so much on my work and responsibilities that I forgot to think about what truly made me happy. Claire smiled and told me that everyone deserves a life where they do not have to hide the parts of themselves that matter most. Her words stayed with me. I wondered if she realized how much they affected me. That night, after we said goodbye, I walked home feeling different. I understood that my feelings were changing, but I was still trying to understand what that meant. I was not ready to define everything. I was not ready to make assumptions. But I knew one thing with certainty. Claire was no longer just someone I wanted to understand. She was someone I wanted to know completely. And perhaps the biggest discovery was not something I found about her. It was something I was finally discovering about myself. For the first time in my life, I stopped trying to explain away what I felt. I had spent so many years believing that if something was important, it had to be obvious. I thought meaningful changes came with dramatic moments and clear answers. But with Claire, everything happened quietly. It was hidden in ordinary conversations, familiar places, and small moments that I once considered simple friendship. The more I accepted that truth, the more I realized I was not discovering something new about her. I was finally allowing myself to understand what had always existed between us. After that evening walk, I started paying closer attention to the way we connected. Not because I wanted to search for proof, but because I wanted to appreciate the person Claire had always been. I noticed how easily we could talk for hours about anything. We could discuss our dreams, our worries, and even the things we were afraid to admit to ourselves. There was a level of comfort between us that I had never experienced with anyone else. It felt natural, like something that had grown slowly over time without either of us forcing it. A few weeks later, Claire invited me to a small gathering with some of her colleagues from the architecture firm. I had met some of them before, but this time I saw Claire in a different environment. I watched the way people respected her ideas and trusted her judgment. She was confident without needing attention. She was passionate without trying to impress anyone. Seeing her surrounded by people who admired her reminded me why I had always been drawn to her personality. Claire had a quiet strength that made others feel safe. Later that evening, after everyone left, Claire and I stayed outside talking. The city lights reflected on the streets, and for a while, neither of us felt the need to rush home. We talked about how strange it was that people could know each other for years and still discover new things about one another. Claire laughed and said that everyone has parts of themselves they reveal only when they feel truly comfortable. Her words stayed with me because they described exactly what I was experiencing. I realized that trust was not about knowing every detail from the beginning. Trust was about creating a space where someone felt safe enough to share those details when the time was right. That night, I wanted to ask Claire more questions. I wanted to understand the parts of her life she had not shared yet. But I also knew that some stories could not be rushed. They had to be offered, not demanded. For the first time, I understood that caring about someone meant respecting their pace as much as wanting to know them. When I returned home, I looked through some of the photographs I had taken over the years. There were pictures of places, events, and people who had passed through my life. Then I found several photographs of Claire. Some were from trips we had taken, some were from ordinary days, and some captured moments I had almost forgotten. Looking at them, I realized something that surprised me. I had spent years capturing the world around me, but Claire had become one of the most meaningful stories I had ever been part of. And maybe the reason I had been searching for answers was because a part of me already knew the truth. I just needed the courage to see it. I used to believe that understanding someone meant knowing their history, their habits, and the stories they chose to share. But with Claire, I was learning that true understanding went beyond facts. It was about recognizing the emotions behind those stories and appreciating the parts of a person that were not always visible. The more I discovered about her, the more I realized that my connection with Claire had been growing in ways I never expected. After years of friendship, I found myself standing at a point where I could no longer pretend nothing had changed. I did not want to rush anything, and I did not want to risk the trust we had built. But I also knew that ignoring my feelings would mean ignoring an important part of myself. For someone who spent her career observing the world through a camera lens, I found it surprising how difficult it was to look honestly at my own life. I could capture emotions in strangers, but I struggled to name my own. Claire had always been the person who encouraged me to be brave in my work and follow my creativity. Now I wondered if I needed to follow that same advice in my personal life. One afternoon, Claire and I visited a quiet bookstore in Portland that we had loved for years. We walked through the aisles, discussing books, memories, and the places we wanted to see someday. It felt like one of our usual days together, but something about it felt different. Maybe it was because I was finally paying attention to what had always been there. I noticed how comfortable silence felt between us. I noticed how easily we understood each other without needing many words. I noticed that being around Claire felt less like spending time with someone I knew and more like being exactly where I belonged. While we sat in a small corner of the bookstore cafe, Claire asked me a question that stayed with me. She asked if I was happy with the direction my life was taking. It was a simple question, but it made me think deeply. I told her that I was grateful for my career and the life I had built, but I also admitted that I sometimes wondered if I had been avoiding certain truths because they felt too difficult to face. Claire listened carefully, the way she always did. She did not interrupt or try to give me an answer. She simply allowed me to be honest. That moment reminded me why Claire was different. She never tried to change me. She never pushed me to become someone else. She simply created a space where I could discover myself. Later that day, as we walked through the streets of Portland, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I realized that my fear was not about discovering something new. My fear was about accepting something I had already started to understand. Claire was not a mystery I needed to solve. She was a person I wanted to know more deeply, with patience and respect. The hidden chapter of her story mattered because it was part of who she was, but I was beginning to understand that my own hidden chapter mattered too. Maybe this journey was never only about learning more about Claire. Maybe it was also about finally allowing myself to be honest about who I was. There are moments in life when the truth does not arrive as a sudden realization. Instead, it slowly becomes impossible to ignore. That was what happened with Claire. I did not wake up one morning with every answer suddenly clear. I simply reached a point where pretending not to notice was harder than accepting what I already felt. For years, I had described Claire as my closest friend. That was true. She was my closest friend. But I was beginning to understand that friendship was only one part of what connected us. The more honest I became with myself, the more I saw how much trust and care existed between us. One evening, Claire invited me to visit a small art exhibition featuring local creators. Since photography and architecture had always been ways for us to connect, places like that felt natural for us. We walked through the gallery, talking about the different pieces and sharing our opinions. Claire always had a thoughtful perspective. She could look at something simple and find a deeper meaning hidden beneath the surface. Watching her that night reminded me why I admired her long before I understood my feelings. It was never only about how talented she was. It was about the way she saw the world. After the exhibition, we sat outside at a small cafe nearby. The conversation moved from art to our personal lives. Claire talked about how difficult it had been for her to be honest about certain parts of herself when she was younger. She explained that there were times when she worried about being misunderstood, so she learned to keep some things private until she felt safe enough to share them. Listening to her, I realized something important. Claire had not been distant because she did not trust me. She had simply been protecting parts of herself that were meaningful. Everyone has pieces of their story that require time and courage to reveal. I thought about my own life and how often I had done the same thing. I had built my career around capturing honesty from other people, but I had spent years avoiding honesty within myself. Claire's words made me question why I had been so afraid. Was I afraid of changing our friendship? Was I afraid of discovering feelings I could not explain? Or was I afraid because accepting the truth meant accepting a new version of myself? A few days later, I found myself looking through old photographs from the past 8 years. There were images of places we visited, celebrations we shared, and ordinary moments that had become meaningful memories. In almost every important chapter of my adult life, Claire was there. She was not someone who suddenly entered my world. She had been quietly becoming one of the most important people in it. That realization brought both comfort and uncertainty. I knew I cared about Claire deeply, but I also knew that meaningful relationships required honesty. I did not want to make decisions based only on fear. I wanted to understand what we truly meant to each other. For the first time, I considered that maybe the most important conversation of our lives was not about the past. It was about the future we had never allowed ourselves to imagine. I spent several days trying to understand what I was truly feeling, but the more I thought about Claire, the clearer one thing became. My feelings were not something that appeared suddenly. They had been growing quietly through years of trust, shared memories, and countless moments when she made my life better simply by being there. The difficult part was not realizing that Claire was important to me. I had always known that. The difficult part was accepting that the way I saw her had changed. I was no longer only thinking about the past we shared. I was thinking about the possibility of a future I had never allowed myself to imagine. I decided that the only way to move forward was to be honest. Not because I expected a certain answer from Claire, and not because I wanted to change what we had, but because our connection deserved honesty. Avoiding the conversation felt like I was protecting our friendship, but deep down I knew I was only protecting myself from uncertainty. A few days later, Claire and I met at the same coffee shop where we had shared so many conversations over the years. It felt almost symbolic to be sitting there again, surrounded by familiar sounds and memories. I watched her carefully as she talked about her latest architecture project. She looked passionate and confident, the same person I had admired for years. But this time, I was seeing her with a new level of awareness. After we finished our drinks, we walked through the nearby streets. The evening was calm, and Portland felt peaceful around us. I remember thinking that some conversations are difficult not because the words are complicated, but because they carry so much meaning. Finally, I told Claire that I had been thinking about our relationship and how much she meant to me. I told her that over time, I had started seeing our connection differently. I admitted that I was afraid because I did not want to lose the friendship that had become one of the most important parts of my life. Claire listened quietly. She did not look surprised, but she also did not rush to respond. Instead, she took a moment before sharing her own thoughts. She told me that she had spent years wondering if I would ever notice that our relationship meant something beyond ordinary friendship. Hearing those words felt like discovering another hidden chapter of a story we had both been writing without realizing it. Claire explained that she had never wanted to pressure me or make me feel uncomfortable. She valued our friendship too much to risk making me feel like I had to choose. That was the moment I understood something important about Claire. Her care for me had never been about expecting anything in return. It had always been about respect and patience. We spent the rest of the evening talking openly about our fears, our hopes, and the years we had shared. There was no dramatic moment that changed everything instantly. Instead, there was something much more meaningful. There was understanding. For the first time, we were no longer trying to guess what the other person felt. We were simply being honest. And as I walked home that night, I realized the biggest discovery was not about Claire's hidden story. It was about the courage we both found to finally tell our own. After that conversation with Claire, I expected everything to feel completely different. I thought there would be some dramatic moment where our entire relationship would suddenly change, but instead, life continued in a surprisingly natural way. We still laughed about the same things, shared our thoughts about our work, and enjoyed the comfortable routines we had built over the years. The difference was that we were no longer hiding behind uncertainty. For the first time, we were both aware of the feelings that had quietly existed between us, and that honesty brought a new kind of peace. I realized that the strongest connections are not always created by grand gestures. Sometimes they are built through years of trust, patience, and small moments that show someone they matter. Claire and I had already created that foundation long before we understood what it meant. The conversation did not erase our history. It gave our history a new meaning. In the weeks that followed, we took our time learning how to understand this new chapter. We did not want to rush into anything simply because we had finally admitted our feelings. We wanted to respect everything we had built together. Our friendship was still important, and we knew that any future we created needed to be based on the same honesty and trust that had always connected us. I noticed small changes, not because we became different people, but because we allowed ourselves to be more open. Claire shared more stories about her life, her dreams, and the experiences that shaped who she had become. I found myself doing the same. I told her about fears I had carried for years, doubts I rarely admitted, and hopes I had kept quiet because I was afraid they sounded unrealistic. With Claire, those conversations felt easy. She never made me feel like I had to explain myself perfectly. She simply listened and reminded me that being understood was one of the greatest gifts two people could give each other. One weekend, we visited a coastal town outside Portland and spent the day walking along the shoreline. It was not a planned celebration or a dramatic turning point. It was simply a day together, enjoying the peacefulness of the ocean and the feeling of starting something new. We talked about the years we had known each other and laughed about how many moments we had misunderstood. Claire joked that she had always wondered when I would finally notice how much she cared about me. I laughed because I knew she was right. Looking back, the signs had always been there. I had just never allowed myself to see them clearly. That trip helped me understand that our story was not about discovering a completely new person. It was about discovering a new way of seeing someone who had already been important for so long. Claire was still the same person who supported me, challenged me, and believed in me. The only difference was that now I could finally acknowledge how deeply she had become part of my life. As we watched the sunset that evening, I thought about the hidden chapters we all carry. Every person has parts of themselves waiting to be understood. Sometimes the most meaningful discoveries are not about finding something unknown. They are about recognizing the value of something that was already there. And for the first time, I felt certain that Claire and I were ready to write the next chapter together. I used to think that finding the truth about Claire would be the most important part of our story. I believed the discovery would be the moment that changed everything. But as time passed, I realized the real transformation was not discovering something hidden about her. It was learning how to appreciate everything that had been visible all along. Claire had always been someone who brought calm into my life. She was the person who reminded me to slow down, to notice small moments, and to believe that my own story was worth sharing. Now that we had chosen honesty, I began to see our connection with a new sense of gratitude. We were not trying to become different people. We were simply allowing ourselves to be more open about who we already were. The months that followed felt both familiar and new. We continued supporting each other's careers and personal goals. I photographed new projects around Portland, searching for meaningful stories through my camera. Claire continued creating beautiful spaces through her architecture work, always finding ways to combine creativity with the needs of the people she worked with. Watching her grow professionally reminded me how much I admired her dedication. Claire never chased success for attention. She cared about creating something valuable that would leave a positive impact. One afternoon, I visited one of her completed projects. As I walked through the space she had designed, I noticed how every detail reflected her personality. The natural light, the thoughtful arrangement, and the feeling of comfort throughout the building all represented the way Claire viewed the world. She believed that environments could influence emotions and memories. Standing there, I realized that this was exactly what she had done in my life too. She had created a space where I felt accepted, understood, and encouraged to be myself. Later that evening, we sat together and talked about how much our lives had changed. Claire admitted that she had once worried about losing the friendship we shared. She said that friendship had always been the most important foundation because it allowed trust to exist before anything else. Hearing that made me appreciate her even more. She never wanted to take something from my life. She only wanted to share something meaningful if I felt the same way. That kind of patience showed me the depth of her character. It was not just affection that connected us. It was respect. It was the understanding that both people deserved to feel comfortable and valued. I also started reflecting on my own journey. For years, I had been searching for stories outside myself. I traveled, photographed strangers, and looked for moments that revealed something honest about humanity. But I had never realized that my own life contained a story just as meaningful. A story about friendship, courage, and the decision to stop hiding from my own feelings. Claire helped me understand that being honest with yourself does not mean losing who you were before. It means accepting every part of your journey. As we continued building our future together, I no longer saw the past as something confusing. Every memory, every conversation, and every quiet moment had led us to where we were. The hidden chapters were never something to fear. They were simply parts of a story waiting for the right moment to be understood. I used to believe that the most meaningful discoveries in life were the ones that surprised us. The moments that arrived unexpectedly and changed everything in an instant. But after everything Claire and I experienced, I learned that some of the most important discoveries happen slowly. They come from paying attention, from being honest, and from finally understanding the value of something that has been there all along. As our lives continued together, I started appreciating the small moments more than ever before. I no longer felt the need to search for some perfect explanation of our connection. Instead, I focused on building something genuine with the person who had supported me through so many seasons of my life. Claire and I continued creating memories in the places that had always been meaningful to us. We returned to the coffee shop where we had shared countless conversations. We walked through familiar Portland streets where we had once discussed our dreams without knowing how much our lives would change. Those ordinary places became reminders of how much we had grown. One thing I admired most about Claire was how she approached the future. She did not believe in rushing through life just to reach the next milestone. She believed in appreciating the process. That perspective changed the way I viewed my own journey. As a photographer, I had always searched for the perfect image, the perfect moment, the perfect story. Claire helped me understand that beauty was not always found in perfection. Sometimes it existed in the imperfect, everyday moments that shaped who we were. We began talking more openly about the future. Not with pressure or unrealistic expectations, but with curiosity and excitement. We discussed places we wanted to visit, projects we wanted to complete, and the kind of life we hoped to create. Those conversations felt different from the ones we had years earlier. Before, we were two friends imagining separate futures. Now, we were two people considering how our paths could continue together. One weekend, Claire and I visited a small coastal town where we could escape the busy pace of our daily routines. We spent hours walking near the water, exploring local shops, and talking about memories from the past. At one point, Claire asked me if I ever regretted not understanding our connection sooner. I thought about the question carefully. The old version of me might have wished that I had realized everything earlier. But the person I had become understood that timing mattered. Every experience we shared helped us become the people we were when we finally recognized what we meant to each other. I told Claire that I did not regret the years we spent as friends. Those years were not a delay. They were the reason we had such a strong foundation. We already knew how to support each other, communicate honestly, and respect each other's individuality. That was something valuable that could not be created overnight. As we watched the evening sky change colors over the coastline, I thought about how different my life felt compared to the person I used to be. I was no longer afraid of uncertainty. I was no longer trying to control every possible outcome. I had learned that some of the best chapters in life begin when we allow ourselves to accept unexpected possibilities. Claire was never just a hidden story I wanted to understand. She was the person who helped me understand my own story. And as we continued moving forward, I knew the greatest discovery was not something I found. It was something we built together. I used to believe that every important discovery came from looking for something unknown. I thought the greatest moments in life happened when we found something hidden, something unexpected, something that had been waiting for us to uncover. But after everything I experienced with Claire, I understood that sometimes the most meaningful discoveries are not about finding something new. They are about finally seeing what has always been there. When I think back to the beginning of our story, I remember how simple everything seemed. Claire was my closest friend. She was the person I trusted, the person I could talk to about anything, and the person who always made difficult days feel easier. I never imagined that the friendship we built over 8 years would become the foundation for something even deeper. But maybe that was the reason our connection became so special. We did not start with expectations. We started with understanding. We started with respect. We started by simply being two people who enjoyed sharing life together. Looking back now, I realized that Claire had been showing me who she was all along. She was patient when I needed time. She was supportive when I questioned myself. She was honest even when honesty was difficult. The things I once considered ordinary were actually the moments that showed the true meaning of our relationship. I spent years searching for stories through my photography, trying to capture emotions and connections between people. But the story that changed me the most was the one I was living myself. Claire taught me that some stories are not discovered through a single dramatic moment. They are created through thousands of small choices made over time. Choosing to listen. Choosing to stay. Choosing to understand. As we continued building our future together, I noticed how much I had changed. I was no longer the person who was afraid of uncertainty. I no longer believed that every decision needed to have a perfect answer before I could move forward. I learned that life is not about controlling every possibility. It is about having the courage to embrace the moments that feel meaningful. Claire and I continued supporting each other's dreams. She created spaces that reflected her creativity and passion, while I continued capturing stories through my photography. We encouraged each other to grow while still appreciating the people we had always been. That balance became one of the most valuable parts of our connection. We did not complete each other because we were incomplete. We chose each other because we appreciated who we already were. Sometimes I still think about the version of myself who was afraid to look deeper. I understand why she was scared. Change can be difficult, especially when something important is at risk. But I also know that avoiding change means avoiding possibilities. The greatest lesson Claire gave me was the courage to be honest. Not only with her, but with myself. The hidden chapter one discovered was never really about a secret. It was about understanding a person who had always mattered to me. It was about recognizing the beauty of a connection that had grown naturally through time, trust, and care. Today, when I look at Claire, I do not see someone who suddenly changed my life. I see someone who had been quietly shaping it for years. The discovery was not a single moment. It was every conversation, every memory, and every step that brought us here. And now I know that the most beautiful stories are not always the ones where we find something we never had. Sometimes they are the ones where we finally recognize what was with us all along.